Alright guys, this is my video guide for my Path of Exile 3.8 Frostblades Champion build. I started playing this build at the end of 3.7 because I had a pretty good idea that it wasn't going to get nerfed since it basically scaled its damage totally differently from Cyclone Slayer. I knew that it would be safe, and so I started leveling it and working on it in Standard, and it's now reached its final form. And with it having reached final form, I thought I would share it with you. So I think the build is really good and really out of the ordinary. I think last league, less than 1% of people used Frostblades in League, so it's definitely a very powerful build that you guys can use in order to play the current Blight League. Relatively expensive as melee builds tend to be when it comes to crafting if you want min-max gear. But again, like every build in Path of Exile, you can go absolutely insane with min-max. I think you can get away with kind of medium level gear with this and it still be pretty good, as long as you hit certain minimum gear pieces that we will talk about in the video. That are going to set you back a few exalts. As a result of it actually costing you a few exalts to get this going, I don't think that it is a great league starter, although it is definitely it's definitely capable of doing so. I think you might be better off with a different league starter. However, the build is quite capable of functioning without the multi-exalt, multi-modded weapons that I'm going to suggest that you use, and you can function quite well on a budget till later. But yeah, the build is great because it has kind of absurd single target damage, and as you can see from the video, it has of clearing a T16 map. It has just as good a clear as pretty much any melee build, if not actually a better clear than most melee builds. Most melee builds do not have the ability to kill things that are multiple screens over. This build, in fact, can destroy entire screens all at once. As you'll see when I fight the Legion, you can kill and tag things that are off screen, and you can at times you'll kill things that are multiple screens over. So I think it has the advantage of being kind of better at clearing than most melee builds, but also having kind of absurd single target damage. So with that said, I think you guys will really enjoy this build. I know that a lot of people are big fans of melee in PoE and they don't really want to play anything else, so maybe you'll give this one a try. Anyway guys, stay tuned and we'll get into the guide.
So the Frostblades Champion, how does it work? How do we scale our damage? Essentially what we are going to do is use is we're going to buff our physical damage as high as we can. With a crit build, of course, and then we are going to convert our physical damage as extra cold, and we're going to do that with Shaper's gear. So I will show you some of the basics. Our basic weapons, we're going to dual wield jeweled foils. They're going to be multi-modded. And the important thing that you want to roll on each weapon is gain a % of your physical damage as extra cold. Since it's as extra, that means it is a straight multiplier to our physical damage. So all the mods you see, your standard typical mods that you're going to expect on a multi-modded weapon crit build, but with the difference that instead of rolling for the Fortify mod like we did last league on most of the Slayer Cyclone builds, the mod that we're going to be trying to hit is the gain a % of physical damage as extra cold, and you can only get that on a shaped base. Additionally, we'll scale even more by getting an amulet that also has gain physical as extra cold, and we will gain more physical as extra cold from our Taste of Hate flask. So essentially what is going to happen is the build is going to have very high amounts of physical damage, which will be fully converted to cold damage, so we will not be doing any physical damage. And then the physical damage we do have, in the original base damage, will get converted will be given to us as extra cold damage. So the damage gets very, very high from the Fizz as extra. So to break it down, I want to go over the main gem layouts. The main DPS gem, of course, is Frostblades. That is the main damage. We link it with Multi-Strike. Multi-Strike is super good in this build. Elemental damage with attacks, very obvious since our damage is all elemental. It's a straight huge damage multiplier. Melee Fizz, again, another huge damage multiplier. And then we have our optional slot. If you do not have a white socket yet in your armor, I would just use Ancestral Call, because you need Ancestral Call for clearing to make clearing efficient. If you do have a white socket, then you can have Hypothermia on swap for single target. Hypothermia is a huge DPS increase for single target compared to Ancestral Call, but Ancestral Call got changed in the 3.8 patch, so it does at level 20, it doesn't have any sort of damage loss for using it, so it doesn't feel terrible to use in single target situations anymore. But if you can get a white socket in your armor, then switch for Hypothermia. And then our last link is Ruthless, which in a build with Multi-Strike makes massive chunks. You will notice very well when you're fighting a single target fight and you're just holding your attack button down, you'll see the damage start to come off in huge chunks, and that is when your Ruthless kicks in. Though that's our main damage link. And so let's talk about some other important pieces of gear. As I touched on, you want an amulet with Fizz as extra cold. I have an Assassin's Mark ring. I would encourage you to also get an Assassin's Mark ring. Just every crit build should pretty much have one at this point. It doesn't matter if it's level 12 or level 8. The difference is really negligible. I'm using a Mark of the Elder. You do not have to use a Mark of the Elder. I know for people that are on a much tighter budget, especially early on in the league, it's going to be hard to cap your resists and all of that and have good life with a Mark of the Elder. So you might just need to have another ring, like a 2-stone ring in this slot. The Mark of the Elder is just pure damage greed if you can manage to balance your resists. The other thing that I would highly recommend is a fossil crafted helmet that has the nearby enemies have minus 9% to cold resistance. This helmet is a huge DPS increase because of that mod, and having that cold resistance minus is very, 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 very good. Okay, so then most of the rest of the stuff, our boots and everything, it's just to get resistances. We need to get some stats, some dex, some intelligence to meet our requirements. So you're just going to have resistances where you can, physical damage to attacks, cold damage to attacks, stats where you can. Another piece of gear that's totally optional, but again, a huge DPS increase, are the gloves from the Temple of Atzoatl. You see the suffix modifier, Puhuarte. It gives you cold resistance with a hybrid mod that gives 30 to 50% increased damage with hits against chilled enemies. Every enemy that we hit is going to be chilled, so a 50% damage mod from gloves, pretty darn good. They do not have to be on a spiked glove base. This is just an insanely high-end min-max thing. You can get the Puhuarte base on a lesser base that's not spiked gloves for much cheaper. And it's definitely, once you get to the end game and you're looking to beef up your damage a little bit, it's something I would really look into. As far as my chest, I'm using an Elder base simply for the attacks have +% to crit, as well as +1 to the level of socketed support gems. What I'm doing is trying to just squeeze a little bit more damage out of the build. And normally chest pieces, it's pretty hard to get damage bonuses, so an Elder chest that has those buffs is going to be good. So another thing that you might have noticed is that my life pool is only 5100 HP. We will talk about that a little bit later, but again, my gear is definitely not spec'd towards life. I mean, I have life rolls on almost everything that can have life. Obviously, I have crafted life on a lot of things, and again, I wasn't prioritizing life. I was prioritizing damage. I will talk about why I'm able to do that, but I can understand a lot of players do not like to play melee builds with under 6k life, and a very lot of them don't like to play melee builds with under 7k life, and I totally understand that, totally get that. I will explain why I don't think you need that, but again, there's a lot of things you can do to buff the life up. For example, you can prioritize getting a tier 1 life on both of your rings. You can prioritize getting tier 1 life on your amulet. You can prioritize getting tier 1 life on your gloves. And you can prioritize getting tier 1 life on your chest rather than all the DPS mods that I'm going for. And this will get you close to 6,500. Additionally, you could even use a different chest. You could use a chest that like the Belly of the Beast to get even more HP. So anyway, that is the gear for this build. Again, the only things that are truly non-negotiable are the Shaper weapons with % of physical as extra cold, because that is the key to scaling our damage, and the amulet that has % as physical to extra cold. And then the Taste of Hate flask, which gives you % of physical as extra cold. So with that said, we'll go into the passive tree and talk about some notable stuff there. All right, passive tree, guys. So passive tree is a very standard looking tree for what people would expect from a melee Slayer build. Or not Slayer build, Duelist build. We go to the typical good life nodes, the typical good melee nodes. Obviously, we're not taking the OP Impale nodes because this is not an Impale build. We're scaling our cold conversion and not staying pure Fizz. We are focusing on crit multi. So with that said, there are a couple things I want to show, and again, I will talk about it later, but there will be a POB link in the description. A couple things that stand out. We'll talk about the jewels. The ideal jewel setup is going to be something with life, melee damage, and then as much crit multi as you can get. That's what just makes the most sense as far as damage goes. If you can afford a Watcher's Eye, I would recommend a Watcher's Eye that has damage penetrates % of cold resistance while affected by hatred. That is what you're looking for. The other mods don't matter. You want damage penetrates cold resistance while affected by hatred, since hatred is one of the auras that we run. Then we have two other jewels that I need to point out. And we have two Fight for Survival jewels. So Fight for Survival is great. It buffs our cold damage and also penetrates cold resistance, which is really good. And since we have two of them, it penetrates 30% cold resistance. So between that and our helmet, really most mobs we fight will have no cold resistance. And penetrating cold resistance is really, really good. So then the projectiles from Frostblades will also have a 25% increased projectile speed, which you really notice when you have two of them, because the projectiles just go at blinding speed and you can clear really, really, really fast. But that is the main things. I can't really give you a precise order for leveling. You kind of have to go if you're feeling squishy while you're leveling, prioritize going for life nodes. If you feel like you need more damage while leveling, go for the damage nodes. However, there are some nodes that are super, super good, and Winter Spirit little wheel being one of them that converts your damage to cold and gives you more cold damage. Very good. And then Fangs of Frost is a super powerful thing for this build as well, because penetrating cold resistance is really, really good with this build, since all our damage is cold. But yeah, for the most part, those are the only two things that you want to kind of prioritize early, because they are huge damage boosts for you. So with that said, most of my advice for leveling would be to go down to the right, get Winter Spirit, but then don't worry about the other stuff on the right side of the tree until a little bit later. Once you get Winter Spirit, you want to probably come back and start taking the life nodes up by Constitution, and then get Born to Fight, and then start filling in, I would say, the outside, the far left of the tree, because there's a lot of good defense here. Soul of Steel, very good. You want to prioritize your LA resists relatively early, so getting Barbarism really good, and getting Soul of Steel really good, so we can focus on getting all the defenses up. And then once you have that, then you can just go back and get the damage nodes you need. One thing I would mention is when you get the Fortify Ascendancy node, that is when you want to start speccing into Rampart as soon as possible. So now that I've mentioned it, let's talk about the Ascendancy. Obviously, we're doing Champion. I would prioritize the Fortify nodes with the first two labs that you do. For me, I didn't find a great deal of benefit to just doing the normal lab and just getting Unstoppable Hero and that being it, because I wasn't using Fortify at all in my links, since I knew I wasn't going to be using Fortify Jewel at the end game. So I just waited till like level 55 and did the first and second lab back to back, so I could get the whole node. The big node here gives you Fortify, and then you just get buffs for having Fortify, and it's all really good synergistic defensive stuff while you have Fortify. There's a little bit of damage from the minor nodes, but really the extra armor synergizes really well with Val Molten Shell. The Can't Be Stunned is really, really good. And then just always having Fortify without having to use the gem is really, really good. It means that we can slot in another higher DPS skill gem into our slot. Then the next two labs, you're going to take Conqueror and Worthy Foe. Again, this is another one where I would probably wait till I could get both nodes at the same time. Just do Merc Lab and then Uber Lab back to back, because getting Conqueror without getting Worthy Foe doesn't really get you much, because Conqueror is all about taunt, and you don't really have a way to taunt people until you get Worthy. Actually, I think you can. Now that I think about it, yeah. So actually, you can get Conqueror whenever you want. I misspoke, because this is what gives you your chance. You get 100% chance to taunt on hit. So why taunt? Besides the damage boost that it gives and the defensive bonuses that you get from Conqueror, since you receive less damage from enemies that you've taunted. The reason that we take taunt is because of one of the last lines on here that says, enemies taunted by you cannot evade attacks. Without taunting our enemies, we only have like an 83% chance to hit. That's not very good. 83% chance to hit, not for a melee build very good, meaning we would have to invest a few affixes and maybe some passives into buffing our accuracy. We do not want to do that. and we definitely don't want to craft hits cannot be evaded on both of our weapons, taking away a DPS affix. So going into Worthy Foe is great because it means that we will have 100% chance to hit, and as well as doing extra damage to taunted foes and getting a really good amount of defense from that. So do you have to play champion? No, you can play this as a Slayer build. Again, if you play this as a Slayer build, you would most likely have to spec into a little bit more accuracy to get your chance to hit up. And you'll also be much more glass cannony. If you're playing in a Slayer build, you're going to have really good damage, probably better damage than this. However, you're going to have to use a fortified jewel or skill gem, and that will not be, and it won't come with any of these defensive bonuses, and you're not going to have the defensive bonuses from Taunt and Conqueror. So I personally think that Champion's the way to go with this. The defensive bonuses are super good, and the defensive bonuses, incidentally, are one of the reasons why I feel very comfortable with 5100 HP and getting all the way to level 97 with that, and not really dying too much along the way, is because of all these nice layered defenses. Additionally, as far as layered defenses go, I would be remiss if I didn't mention now that obviously we're going to use Val Molten Shell, and we're going to have a cast on damage taken link on our setup. But all that said, Chill and Freeze, which we will be doing to pretty much everything that we fight is basically going to be chilled, and everything's going to be frozen. Enemies that are frozen are not doing any damage. And when you hit an enemy and you're shooting out the frost blades at all the nearby enemies are going to be frozen. And they're going to be and these frost blades go off screen, and so there will be things that are frozen off screen. Things that are frozen cannot do damage to you. There's very, very infrequently do you even get hit by too much in this build. That's why I feel perfectly reasonable running a low health point pool, just because everything's chilled and frozen. You don't take a lot of damage from enemies that aren't actually able to do anything. So it's very safe, and all together, you can then skimp on life rolls on your gear, which will, one, make your gear more affordable, and two, allow you to squeeze out more DPS in the long run. Okay, so that is it for the passive tree. All right, real quickly, I want to talk about leveling weapons and stuff. Obviously, we all know 7 League Step, Tabula, and Goldrim are like the trifecta of leveling. So what about, and then you want to go with La Hoops if you have rings, and then whatever belt helps you out at the given time. And then Astramentus is really, really good. Duresso Salute, really, really good. Everyone knows all about that. So weapons, though, at level 10, you can get the Princess. The Princess, as you can see, says gain 29% of physical damage as extra cold. That synergizes with what we're trying to do in this build very, very well. So at level 10, we get this weapon that really is perfect for what we're trying to do and will help you out. You can get these for dirt cheap. Dirt cheap. And they're level 10 weapons, and they will last you a good long while. You can you can dual wield princesses at level 10 and keep them till level 35, and they'll still be doing good damage. Especially when you have 2 of them, it's just really good. You'll be doing super, super good damage. Then at level 35, you want to swap out one of your princesses, but not both, with Story of the Vol. Story of the Vol, you can get these for pretty cheap. They will sometimes give you cold, sometimes give you random. They give you a random element. But what is very important is, one, they do a lot more base physical damage than Princess, so it's nice. But hits with this weapon always ignite, freeze, and shock. So always freezing is humongous. You want that always freeze, just all of a sudden you equip one Story of the Vol, and all of a sudden you are really getting that defensive lockdown from freezing every enemy. And then every enemy is also going to be shocked, meaning they're going to be taking a lot more damage. So Story of the Vol is really, really good. And you're going to want to go with one princess and one Story of the Vol. Then, when you get to level, I think, like 55, you can use the upgraded version of Story of the Vol, which is Fate of the Vol. That's a little bit more expensive. I didn't bother with it. I used the combo of Princess and Story of the Vol all the way until I was able to use what level was it that I was able to equip my in-game foils. But Fate of the Vol is really good. It's like a super version of Story of the Vol with like quadruple the damage. It's just really, really good. All of your damage is converted to elemental. And it gives you massive damage bonuses against enemies that are ignited, freezed, and shock. So when you hit 55, you can start dual wielding Fate of the Vols, and that will carry those. And dual wielding Fate of the Vols will carry you into maps as long as it takes to get your jeweled foils sorted out at the end game. So that is the sort of leveling progression. Again, dual wielding Princess from level 10 to level 35. At level 35, you pick up a Story of the Vol, and then at level 55, you dual wield Fate of the Vols, and then you keep using those until you get your jeweled foils sorted. So yeah, that is it for the leveling uniques. And so lastly, we will touch on the POB and talk numbers. So in the POB, right now I have it set up for max single target damage with the hypothermia setup, and that gives us 4.89 million single target damage, which is more than acceptable and enough to clear all content in the game with not really a big deal. You can see the configuration I have, so you can tell I'm not cheating. I have it set to Shaper Guardian, enemies taunted, enemies chilled and frozen. That's pretty much guarantee. Max power charges, max frenzy charges. Again, that's not particularly hard to get. Endurance charges don't actually do anything for our damage, but we have them, so we use them. Onslaught, yes, great. We have Onslaught on kill boots, and you can get Onslaught from Abyss Gems, from boots, or even use a flask. It's not that big of a deal. Fortify, we get that from Ascendancy. Our flasks are always active. Have you been hit recently? I only have that checked, and that is actually a nice damage boost because of the lab enchant I have. That gives me cold damage if I've been hit recently. Without it, we're at 4.69 total DPS. I have it checked. I think it's reasonable. I think most people can get Uber Lab good boot enchants. I'm going to guess that the ideal boot enchant is the 16% attack speed if you've killed recently. I don't have that. So I would imagine that the DPS numbers are probably going to be even better if you have that. So this might be underselling it a little bit. If you want to run Uber Lab 10 times or so until you get that boot enchant, go for it. You'll get even better damage. And then have you taunted an enemy recently? Yes, we have, because the second we hit something, it's taunted. So really, we're not really making a lot of crazy assumptions here. Yes, my gear is pretty good, but 4.89 million on a single target is not particularly unreasonable with decent investment in gear. Even if you are on much more of a budget, it's very easy to get to 3 million DPS gear. So and again, even then, 3 million DPS, more than enough to clear all the content in the game. So this is the same setup, but with Ancestral Call instead of Hypothermia. This is our main clearing setup, and I can show you the damage there. The single target damage on the clearing setup goes down to 3.6 million. Obviously, because Hypothermia is busted and Ancestral Call, busted single target and Ancestral Call, not set up for single target. However, 3.6 million, again, is more than enough to clear all the content in the game. This is super good at clearing, and even if you don't have that white socket and you have to use Ancestral Call on bosses in the meantime, whatever. 3.6 million is more than enough DPS to handle everything. So yeah, that is it for the POB. Again, a link to the POB link will be in the description below, so you can import it and check it out and see all the little things that I'm doing. So with that said, I just want to touch on the last few things of summary, miscellaneous stuff. So the other links we have is our Leap Slam with Endurance Charge on Melee Stun, so we get Endurance Charges from. Faster attacks, of course, with Leap Slam. And then Blood Magic, so we can always use it even when we're low on mana. On our boots, we're going to have our auras. We have an Enlighten setup. Enlighten's pretty good. You can get level 3 for free just by leveling yours. Level 4 is an optional luxury that you don't necessarily have to have. Herald of Purity linked to it with Herald of Ice and Hatred. Those are our main 3 damage auras. We do have a Precision on one of our weapons that is unlinked because we are using Enhance with Blood Rage. Enhance level 3 is going to give Blood Rage more 2% more attack speed, so just 2% more attack speed for the build is great. But if we linked them, then the Enhance would apply to Precision and add a big mana multiplier that would eat up a lot of our free mana, and we don't want to do that. Our helmet link is going to be Ancestral Warchief, Melee Fizz, Fortify, and Elemental damage with attacks. The reason why Fortify, you could run Conk Effect here. You might run into issues with not having your intelligence high enough, so that's always a problem. But also it has the tag Melee, and my helmet has the crafted mod +1 to the level of socketed melee gems. So it just makes your Ancestral Warchief hit that much harder. Plus your Ancestral Warchief and your totems have Fortify, so they're a bit tankier when there's damage floating around. Nothing really too surprising there. And then on our other foil is our Val Molten Shell with cast when damage taken and ink duration. So we'll be getting passively when we take damage, we'll be getting our Molten Shell, and then we'll have our Val Molten Shell with ink duration. Val Molten Shell lasting 25 seconds, meaning you can pop it at the beginning of a boss fight and go in and kind of face tank for a while till your Val Molten Shell is burned off. And hopefully the boss is dead by then. If the boss isn't dead by then you have to play normally. But up until then, you're pretty much God mode. So yeah, very good. Very, very good overall build. And then lastly, I want to say, I know this is out of the ordinary. I'm mostly known for Guild Wars 2 videos. But this is the build that I wanted to run. It's kind of off meta. Not many people are playing a build like this. And I think it's interesting, and I think it's really a lot of fun. It's one of the most fun builds that I've played, and I think you guys that are playing Path of Exile would enjoy it. So thank you for sticking around and watching it, and if you have any questions, hit me up in the comments below.